Welcome to the Will to Power podcast. I'm your host, Nick Vital. Before I begin, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Lets me know you like this shit. And let's begin. So today's episode is very special. I actually have an interview. First interview ever, first podcast of the new year. So let's get into it. This is Ubersoy.
Okay, I'm here with Ubersoy. Hi, Ubersoy.
Hi.
How's it going?
Well, it's fine. I'm working on a couple of things at the moment, so it will be very. One video will come out this year, and then there will be two more in the making.
Yeah, you're a very industrious content creator, and I want to get to that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to kind of introduce you to the audience and let people know how I came across you, actually. So I think it was probably one of your debates. So I'm not sure who it was with. But what I noticed was a few things. Kind of on a philosophical tip, you talked a little bit about virtue in a very materialist sense. And I found that very interesting. You know, you have this kind of like very objective materialist notion of virtue. And I believe in that debate, you're counterposing that against kind of like theological notions of virtue. And then I also believe I heard that you used to be a leftist, and you kind of transitioned away from that towards your current politics. So I was kind of wanting to get into that. First, a little bit about your background, like how has your politics and your philosophy shifted, and what caused some of those changes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good question. I guess the first politics that I had really been following, we could put in quotation. I mean, I really haven't thought about it when I was adopting it. It was when I was younger. I was like very much into Red Alert 3. 2. You know, I was into the military. I was into space, and you know, there is a certain country that has been very good at it, and it so happens to be the country from which you could say all of my ancestors are from. It is the Soviet Union. So that's how I mean, communism, like adopting communism, was, I guess, I perceived it as the aesthetic extension of the interests that I liked. So I guess, you know, when I was a child, I was very much into it, but, you know, I vaguely understood it. I was like, oh, well, it's about aesthetics, it's like equality, blah, 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 you know, defeating fascism, and etc. Like, I didn't think a lot about it, rather. So, you know, I guess you could say it was a phase, and this phase had started like I guess it was at its zenith probably when I was like 12, 13, but then I had to somehow I was in the basically in 2014 I was playing Minecraft, and I was on a server called Civcraft 2.0, and there was a state was called New Leningrad, and basically, you know, it was ran by socialist communist principles, yada yada yada, and I was, you know, I started building railroads there, and I opened a supermarket. Well, like I mean, I wanted to build a shop. I didn't open it, but wanted to build a shop there, and they're like, fuck you, you can't do that. We're against entrepreneurship or whatever. And you know, this is the first, I guess, instance of where reality has hit me. That was like maybe November or probably October of 2014, And then I phoned my friend. I was like, "What the fuck?" And he was, well, didn't you know that? Like, holy, they're against private property. They're against profit. They're against having a business. I didn't know that. And then I was like, well, maybe I should research more about it instead of actually, like, doing what I was doing before. And I came across I've read the Communist Manifesto my first time, and it turns out that, like, they really are against private property, but they're also against families for whatever reason. But in the Soviet Union, they weren't really against families like the way Marx had described it, and like the way he had described it, the way he had the problems with it. I mean, it seems like he essentially advocated for polyamory, and saying like the monogamy was like bourgeois and whatever. Then I also read like more stuff. I mean, I haven't read The Capital. I've started reading more stuff about it. Like, I wasn't reading anything that contradicted like Marx. I was just trying to understand it, right? I remember like I've read the I forgot the book what it's called, but it's by Engels. It has like something about like scientific principles. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's family and private property. I could be wrong.
No, it's not family and private property. But yeah, I've actually read it in my university.
Scientific, something like scientific socialism.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
I know what
right.
you're talking about.
Yes.
Like, it's like the big.
Yes. So I've read that. I wasn't particularly impressed, and I mean, I looked at that and I looked at reality of what's happened, and there was a little bit of a discontent. Then I have read Lenin, but then I also came about like his works, like what he generally has thought of Russia, his positions regarding the First World War. Then I came across that. Well, I mean, I kind of always knew about like what Stalin had did, of course, but a lot of my family had suffered under it. But I thought like, oh, I mean, it's probably an exaggeration or whatever. And I've came through that, and I learned to accept that it's bad, and it was like a breakdown, like the reality I had before. It was breaking down, and essentially by mid 2015, I wasn't a communist at all. And but nothing replaced it at the moment. I was just disillusioned with it, and I mean, what's even, I guess, more painful to learn was that apparently they like essentially advocated for like global homo stuff, like the supposedly good ones, which is Marx and Engels. So and the other one, Rosa Luxemburg. I've also read her stuff, and I was disillusioned. There are people who is like, oh, that wasn't real Marxism. I want the real Marxism, right? And I was like, the real Marxism is shit. Like, I can support it. That there's no way. Like, my morality is inherently different. So you could probably say I was never a real Marxist, probably. Because
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
the leftist values.
You were very young.
Yeah. So that's that. Then in like 2016, let's say I was red pilled, by the stuff that happened, and I turned like well, I mean, essentially, let's just go back in 2017. Go forth. In 2017, I was like a conservative, like maybe in 2016. That there was also a short term when I was like a conservative.
Now, were you in Russia period, or were you in Russia in 2016, or were you in the West by
I
that
was in
point?
the West since the late 2013, but I mean, I was coming back and forth, not to Russia, but to Israel. So, But yeah,
I see. I
permanently I
see.
was, yeah, and it was like in 2015, but first time I went there in the late 2013. So I guess this too had some form of an impact. But I mean, at the end of the day, I grew to like embrace liberalism, and I mean, I still mostly embrace liberalism. Uh, of course, there were times when I questioned it, but ultimately, I always turn towards now. I'm in the process of creating like a making a rough draft for a new political ideology, but this new political ideology, ultimately, a lot of its basis is in liberalism. Um, yeah, but yeah, I
Hmm.
just want to go back to 2017, 18. Probably the worst thing, that had happened. Like it was the time when I was like a bet your average Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder conservative. So I guess probably that's the only thing that I have consciously accepted and grew disillusioned with the most. If you're talking about disillusions, so it's better not to describe me like an ex-Marxist, but rather like an ex mainstream conservatively oriented person. I mean,
And what kind of turned you away from some of that towards your present political orientation?
sorry, can you repeat the first part of it? The internet is really bad.
What
Hmm.
what prompted you to turn away from that sort of mainstream conservatism
Oh,
towards your present political
yeah.
orientation?
I mean, it's very easy. For they accept leftist morality, however, they do not really. They basically are thinking it just doesn't work, and they are not providing any solution. What's more interesting is that they're basically accepting that races that humans are biologically equal. I'm not just talking about races. And they're they're accepting this lift your own by your bootstrap mentality. They're I mean, lift yourself by your own bootstrap. I think it's a leftist delusion. It's a delusion that everyone can achieve anything. I'm not sure why the conservatives have thoroughly embraced it. I'm not sure it's even in their it works with their
Hmm.
values of hierarchy, of of competence. Obviously, I mean it's a load of crap, and they're sold on it so hard. you know, I mean it's funny, and then the
I
leftists are
wonder how
mocking
much.
it. Hmm.
Well, I wonder how much of that is kind of a rhetorical position. But you mentioned that you don't think they provide too much of an alternative, except for this pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. So, what sort of alternative do you see as having potential?
Yeah, so I mean, for example, if we're talking about broad things like, for example, the left considers itself as collectivistic, the right as individualistic, at least when it comes to the economy. Well, I mean, obviously, we cannot just, embrace either of these dichotomies for complex understanding, for complex policy making. Obviously, you have to take some of that and take some of this. So first, we have to embrace a position where you're somewhere in the middle of collectivism and individualism. I mean, you respect individual rights, but at the same time, you understand that you're living in the community, right? You live in society, as they say, and of course, conservatives need to understand that a change is not only through individual means. It could be collective. It could be through forms of government. Like I don't really understand this conservative skepticism against government. For like, I understand conservative skepticism against the Hollywood, against the media, against the institutions, but the government, I mean, that's the only way where conservatives can actually be voted in. Like, you cannot be voted in into Hollywood, you cannot be voted in into universities, other institutions. The government is actually the place where we have some sort of a
Most certainly.
balance. And I mean, it's just ridiculous that they're playing against the government the way they are playing. So I mean, I guess that's
Well,
that.
I think conservatives are oftentimes very reactive, right? They see what the left is doing and they kind of take the opposite position, or they try to be the contrarian. And what the left has essentially said is that you can create utopia on Earth through government, and that's a very extreme proposal. And I think it also leads to a lot of unintended consequences, right? We saw this in the Soviet Union, we saw it in China. You know, these people who very vehemently believed that they were making paradise on Earth. You know, whenever you do believe
Yes,
that, right, you can do anything. You know, if you truly believe that you're making paradise on Earth, then any sort of action is justified to
that's
get
right.
there
That's right.
morally. You know,
Yes.
so I think a lot of the conservative reactiveness towards that, towards like the apprehensiveness towards government, is based on the reactiveness towards that far left proposal. But yeah, I definitely agree. The right. I don't particularly like the term conservative anymore, or I don't
The
particularly like it at all.
mainstream right. The
I think the
mainstream right.
right needs. Yeah. Well, I think they are eventually going to come around. In part because, you know, we've traditionally understood power as being coming from the government. If that makes sense, it's like
Yes.
we have to worry about government tyranny. But now we're facing a situation and we're having this private power and private tyranny from big tech corporations and biomedical corporations and things like this. So I think people are going to wise up a little bit more and realize that you do need the government
Yes.
simply to be able to check
That's right.
the extreme power of private economic interests. And I think once the right gets on board with that program, or the sooner they do, the better.
Yes, I mean, we already have antitrust laws, there are anti-monopoly laws, there are laws that prevent people from discriminating other people, there are civil rights. I mean, I wish we could extend it to like the political minorities as well. So, you know, I feel like the government is our only resort of actually achieving any right-wing action. It's certainly not the institutions at this moment.
Mm.
It's certainly not Hollywood. Now, I mean, at the same time, I think we should infiltrate it. We should turn them, you know, in a way that best represent our interests. But I want, you know, I want to comment about the government. I mean, I think we could both agree. You know, if there is like a libertarian skeptic who is now listening, what we're saying is that we shouldn't give more power to the government. We are simply saying that the government should act to stop tyranny and stop discrimination, and I mean, in some cases, enforce our laws that we want in a democratic system, right? And I mean, if there's somebody who wants to put laws that are different, that are leftist, I mean, they are welcome to do it in a democratic system. Of course, we'll be against it, but you know, you have to do the right, I guess, liberal democratic procedures if you want, I guess, to get anything done on the law level. I mean, that's that. We're not for big government.
Well, you mentioned liberalism earlier, and at first I was kind of wondering how some of the audience would take that, because obviously
Yes.
my show is kind of geared towards right-wing strategy, but also a very new conception of the right. And I was kind of wanting you to elaborate on that just a little bit, what you mean whenever
Yes.
you say
Yes.
moving towards liberalism.
Yes, I certainly don't mean liberal. I mean, I don't certainly I don't mean cultural leftist liberalism, where basically everyone's the same. You know, everyone is ingrained with some magical rights. What I am saying is that, liberalism, as, for example, envisioned by, viewed by Herbert Spencer, is freedom towards owning property, what else? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, proper government. You have checks against the mob rule, of course, and that even other people have expanded beyond it. It stops the government, and it should also stop individual people from discriminating you based on, if they don't really like you or whatever. I mean, we are seeing right now the falling of liberalism, and liberalism is being used by agents who are fundamentally are leftists, and they are not liberal. Now, again, I don't mean liberalism in a sense that like everyone is genetically equal. No, I mean liberalism that there are democratic norms in the government, and there is a certain culture of tolerance. This is what I mean by liberalism. A lot of my views, I don't believe anyone is surprised, given in my videos, I basically reaffirmed that. So that's what I mean by liberalism.
Yeah, and I agree with you in many ways. I think you study poli-sci, if I'm not mistaken, and I studied history and with a minor in poli-sci.
Mm-hmm.
And going back, many years later and kind of restudying some American history, something that's very exceptional about it was that system of checks and balances, right? It was kind of like, it was this system designed to make sure that no kind of group or faction took too much power, whether it be kind of the mob or the kind of nobility, the kind of the nobility of that era, the kind of political factions. It was very much, or even different parts of the government, right? It's you got the judicial, the executive, the legislative branches. And even within the legislative branches, you have a bicameral system. So little things like that were very intentionally designed to make sure that things stayed balanced. No one group, no one person, no one interest took too much power. So that's one interesting thing I find about liberalism. And the other thing you mentioned was, you kind of support tolerance, and I very much agree with that as well. And I think a lot of people on the right, and a lot of people generally, they have a difficult time making the distinction between tolerance and promotion. So, right, it's like one thing if it's like, okay, there are gay people, whatever, who cares, really? Like, I really don't give a fuck. And there's a difference between that and kind of, oh, it's everywhere, it's on TV, it's your children are learning about gender theory in preschool and things like this. So I think we need to make that distinguish between like tolerance and promotion whenever we talk about.
If I may, I want to expand more on that because even this gay question, in a truly tolerant society, what you would expect is gay people, I guess, being gay and expressing themselves and etc. You would also expect people criticizing that, and for example, what I have did in my video, without actually saying that they shouldn't engage in it. However, I did hint that a lot of it has negative societal consequences, especially if it is involving polyamory, if it is involving bisexuality and transsexuality. So in a true tolerant society, both opinions would be expected to be held. A tolerant society, quote unquote, as envisioned by leftists, is basically when certain minorities, let's say sexual minorities, have all the rights, have all the power, and every single criticism that people are leveling against them is automatically, as Karl Popper would say, I forgot. Yeah, there is no tolerance against it, basically. So if you're criticizing something that you don't like, you're accused of being intolerant, and then, they use individual, private, or governmental force to shut you down. So that's how I would expect what you have said.
Interesting. Well, that kind of leads me in a little bit into the next direction I wanted to go, and that's the fact that you are pretty young. You're recently in university, or you are in university, which is obviously a very let's just say left-wing environment.
It is.
And how have you been able to get along in that environment? Like, how open are you about your politics? Do you keep your head down and just not say anything, and just
no.
try to say
Not
what you think
all.
the teacher wants,
Well,
or do you how do you operate?
yeah,
Let's hear about it.
that's a good question. The first year, I was very careful. Very careful. And by the way, in the first year, which was like September of 2019, I was basically, I wasn't like, the only thing that I challenged was like the pay gap, right? I came to a professor and say, well, if you actually control for like your work experience, how many times you earn, the pay gap basically disappears. I mean, how many hours you work, and like all these factors. And she got so fucking mad. Whoa, her face like turned really angry, and she was a Marxist. Like, she was a Marxist sociology professor. I believe I got an A in her class, but I mean, so that's the only thing I remember. I also challenged my other professor on. Basically, well, at that time I was like, "Oh, free market, so good." I was like more or less like a classical liberal. Basically, it's I guess the closest moment I have ever gotten into being a libertarian. So, I never was a libertarian, but that's the closest thing that I got. And I argued about my professors on political science. Oh, free market, the free market, and he was like, "Oh, look at the work by Thomas Piketty." Then I read, then I started questioning libertarianism more. I also read the what it's called, Keynes, and then some philosopher of, and then I moved away from libertarianism. So that what was in the first year. In the second year, I it's probably the closest I have ever got into like being an ironic leftist, especially in the first semester. Well, I mean, I held like some leftist positions, so I was like, even when it comes to like LGBTQ stuff, I was not as critical towards it as I was now. So you could probably describe myself like at that time as like a left-leaning centrist. By the way, now when I take those political compass tests, I'm always like on the left, like I'm near the center. So, I mean, whatever. And so that's the second year, and yeah. So I wasn't off campus, so I wasn't really arguing with anybody. And now in the third year, this is where after I've just started my channel, my confidence, it went a little bit up, and also I was finally doing tutorials on campus, and I could finally talk with people again, and I was mask off in a lot of my classes. Yeah, a lot of my classes. Well, I mean, I wouldn't like, I would drop race realist talking points without actually confirming or denying that. So in the in the tutorial about mental illnesses, I was straight up dropping eugenicist arguments. Like it's just but I mean, of course, in some places I wouldn't say a word, because, like, for example, in sociology class, like, I knew I'd get fucked up really bad. Yeah, so I only say that when I know I could get away with it. but I speak up
Yeah,
a
and I'll
lot.
interject right here.
Hmm.
Like, just interject right here. I think a lot of people have this image of universities themselves being this kind of like left wing and cults,
They
essentially.
are. They
But
are.
the reality is, if you're well, in a way, yeah, they're like a cult breeding ground and a cult, recruiting ground for sure. Um, and they're definitely, the institution itself is definitely controlled by that left wing ideology. But at the same time, because of the way that it's set up, as long as you can kind of articulate yourself with good optics, and if you can articulate yourself intelligently, you can get away with saying a lot of stuff. And
Hmm.
I made a podcast about that earlier, but I think that's really interesting that you were kind of going mask off and still getting away with it. And I imagine you were doing it in a way that was pretty intelligent. You do kind of have a little bit of social intelligence. You can read the room and know how far you can push people, and it's kind of good to get them on tilt in a way. If you can say something but not get too emotional about it, but other
Hmm.
people get kind of emotional about it,
Yeah. Oh, they
then
they
it
they do.
doesn't necessarily.
Yeah. Like,
Oh yeah,
I mean, after classes, somebody would come to me like say, "Oh, and be smug about what I said in class." I was also called like an idiot for saying that mental illnesses are primarily genetic. So, I mean, whatever. Yeah. So a lot of people, I really pissed them off, but again, in some cases, even if I was super intelligent, I would never. Well, for example, I've taken a course recently, sociology of education. I can never say anything that I truly believe in, even in the most intelligent way, because this course is, I mean,
yeah.
it's full critical theory, and like basically the teacher who teaches it, she's like an Indian, and she talks about like how white people are bad and how if they don't stop like
Is she an Indian woman?
yeah, yeah, like from Asia, yeah,
Yeah,
Indian. uh, Yeah, so
archetype of
she has
a
like a
teacher.
problem that like white people don't like when she accuses them of racism, and she's like, "Well, I'll sue your colonial government for it, like if they don't stop acting this way." Yeah, I mean that's what like it's yeah, like you would imagine a lot of in this class because it's sociology of education. Like you'd imagine there'll be a lot of like theories on education. You'd imagine there'll be a lot of ideas and debates like whether we should even have education and stuff like that. No, instead I've got like trans studies, queer studies, like how blacks, whatever, Black Lives Matter, how white people are bad. The only thing somewhat related to the
Do you,
sociology of
do you,
education was work of Pierre Bourdieu. That's all.
now, do you ever ask her how that will help Western students and Western society and global
Well,
competition
no.
against countries
Well,
like China?
that would be, well, first of all, that would be white supremacy because you're emphasizing Western students. So, I mean, you'd already get a very bad mark in your class. You'd be, it's not an
Okay.
intelligent way to really address
Uh,
this.
so,
Yeah.
how do you operate in this class, in this
Yeah,
extreme
I
pressure with this
haven't. I wasn't
the
operating.
thing is, the thing I
Hmm.
oh, do you just keep your head down in this class?
Yeah. No, I mean, I like
Yeah.
sometimes like I would say what she wants to hear, and of course I was bullshitting. Like I haven't believed any single word that I've said to her, and I mean, she seemed to like what I've said so far, and and other students as well. But like, yeah, you have to lie. You have to get through it. You have to hide your power levels, right? Because if they were to be exposed, then
Yeah.
you'd
Well,
have a lot of problems.
yeah. I mean, I find situations like that. Um, I find it best to be very like obtuse and opaque. I'm sorry. I find it best to be very opaque about what you stand for, while at the same time, uh, being able to very intelligently kind of like pick apart the ideologies that are being professed, if that makes sense. And that
Yes,
kind of
I
shields you a
agree.
little bit from their
That's
criticism.
right.
They can accuse of all these things. You're like, well, I didn't say anything about white people. I just mentioned this is, and then you put words in my mouth and you think you can read my mind. You think not
Yeah,
only do you know my
well,
intentions,
first of
but not
all,
only do you know my intentions, but you also how this will work out as consequence in the world. You're like, me saying this will somehow have this effect in the world, and the intent behind me saying it. It's really like mental gymnastics on these people's parts. But I agree, if you're in this situation, if you need the grade, probably best to not rock the boat too much.
yeah, I mean, especially like they understand race, like they see race. They are not like dumb conservatives who pretend race doesn't exist. She knows that you're a white male, and when you say this thing, she sees it as a white male, trying to obfuscate his white privilege and shield the system of white supremacy. That's what she sees. That's what many of the people who have graduated her class see. They're not racially blind. I mean, it's similarly how a lot of
Yeah,
in the dissident right, like whenever you see like maybe a Jew talking about immigration or something like that, they're like, oh, every single time or whatever. You get the exact same thing here.
yeah,
It's and they hate you,
yeah.
and
These
they're
people are
they
definitely
openly hate
demented.
you, and they don't consider what you have to say as independent from your actual persona. They always consider what you have to say with an extension of your personhood. For them, it's personal. It's not a battle of ideas.
Yeah, well, I mean, these people are in fact demented by these ideas, and it's unfortunate that they're in these positions of power. I think it's best to challenge this as much as possible. It's kind of like resist along the way,
Yes.
because that's what critical theory is, right? It's like critical theory is like, how can we punch as many holes everywhere? Like, how can we criticize absolutely fucking everything to the point of like wiltering the system, under the weight of the weight of our pressure.
Yes.
So applying that same sort of technique, and just resisting as much along the way, and obviously you have to adapt at some point, right? You have to toe the line and kind of, not, like you said, not reveal your power level, but at the same time, I think it's very important to call out, critique those in power. And in this specific instance, she's talking about, white people have all the privilege, men have all the privilege, but here she is as the teacher. I'm assuming, I don't know if she is from India or if she was born in wherever she's teaching at.
She's an ethnic.
But I mean, okay, and yeah, and I think both of us have the experience of not living in the place we were born. Like, we're both very international in a way compared to a lot of our listeners and fan base and amongst the right. But in doing that, like, it's hard to imagine moving to a country and then wanting to tear it down and wanting to tear down its history. Like, that's such an odd idea to me as somebody who lives in foreign countries, that I would go. And I mean, obviously I'm not agnostic. I'm not willy-nilly about it. Yeah, I do have my opinion about the history of the countries that I've been to and I've lived in. But nonetheless, I'm not going there with some intent to change the country. Like, I'm not, and I think a lot of Westerners have that notion that they're still on this holy crusade, only now it's changed to kind of secular gay liberalism, and leftism, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in that case you have this. I'm sure I have this vision in my mind, and she's like this disgustingly ugly troll. Or perhaps she's young, and if she's young, she's even more of a cunt.
I mean, yeah,
but she's got that chip on her shoulder.
She's just a small individual.
She's probably she's probably Brahmin. She's probably like very upper class in her own society, and here she is, kind of parasitically within the West, trying to quote unquote deconstruct it for her own kind of sense of moral superiority.
Yeah,
this is absolutely insane, and this is something that there's no way I could go to China and do this. Could you imagine me as a white man to China and being like, well, I'm going to deconstruct the history of communism in China. It just wouldn't happen. But somehow this is allowed in the West. It's crazy. But yeah, that's very unfortunate. And I believe those people should be opposed. I hope you get through this.
I mean, I'll just say that the people who started it, they were Westerners. We didn't get subverted from the outside. We got subverted from the inside, and we got subverted by our own people. I mean, probably one of the few people who are like not ours is Edward Said and Sarah Ahmed, and I mean, there were a couple of others, but at the end of the day, it's mostly our fault. We allowed this to happen, and we have deconstructed ourselves. I mean, Eric Kaufman writes in length about it in his book, the Fall of WASP America, or something like that. It came out of Christianity. It came out of liberal. What were you trying to say?
I think it's part of a larger trend. Well, I think it's part of a larger, and you see this throughout like the history of the West, right? You had the British and the Portuguese and the Spanish empires kind of spread out, take over the world, and then based on that, they reached a certain level of affluence, and they created a kind of class of professional social critics, people like George Orwell. So you had George Orwell, and his first book was Burmese Days, and it was this critique of racism in Burma, England-possessed Burma in Southeast Asia. And it's kind of critiquing the racism and the hypocrisy and the corruption of colonialism and yada yada yada. But some people would essentially what I've argued in the past is that sort of cultural critique from the inside of empires always precedes those empires collapsing. It's never the colonial subjects rising up in unity, or very rarely. Occasionally you get that happening, but usually it happens. There's a crisis within the colonial center, a crisis of faith within the colonial project that leads to its disintegration. You saw this with England, with it basically giving up its empire. Same thing with Spain and Portugal. I mean, they had the Coronation Revolution. It was like, okay, we're not an empire anymore.
Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it essentially happens like, and that general trend, it didn't stop, right? It kind of continued, that kind of like decay from within.
Yes.
And it's kind of sad to see. And I think we both would like to see a kind of rejuvenation. And I guess that would go towards my next question. I was thinking about asking this earlier, but we kind of talked about classical liberalism and a little bit like the pragmatism of the state. I was just kind of wondering, like, given your politics, like, how would, if you had kind of control, right? If you could change things at a state policy level, not like a magician, I'm going to change human nature, leftism sort of way. But on a state policy level, what kind of state would you like to see? You mentioned a right-wing state. So what would that look like? What would it do? What would it try to accomplish?
So first of all, if I were to capture state power, the first thing I would issue is limitation on all forms of discrimination, which includes political discrimination. Discrimination, as I pursue it, is the not just per se attacking someone on their like characteristics. I view it as a form of like censorship, as a form of being fired for someone's for beliefs. So to get rid of that, and this would allow, and I would also enforce freedom of speech in practically all areas of our institutions. I would break up a lot of monopolies, including Google, right? So these, I mean, that would be the primary state actions, and then the market, it would react accordingly. There'll suddenly be more right-wingers in the academia. There'll suddenly be more right-wingers, like right-wing movies. It would start a social shift. But at the same time, I do have a vision of a right-wing form of government, and I think a right-wing form of government, it's a form of government that is somewhere between a what's it called, a liquid or direct democracy and I guess aristocratic elites who shape society. So what I mean by that is that instead of having representatives, instead of electing people to represent us, we could actually represent us ourselves. And similarly, as they are doing in Switzerland, they're halfway through direct democracy, and similarly as they did in Athens, people who, but there'll be, I mean, in my case, there'll be limits. So people would, not all people would be able to vote. I would take away I guess the universal suffrage. Only a certain amount of people should be able to vote, and only those who possess the right knowledge. And this would not be measured through completing a certain institution, because as we know, they've been subverted. Similarly, it won't be measured through taking an IQ test, but there are two ways it could probably be measured. I actually expanded on it on the critiques of voter ID laws, something like that. And the first is that they have actually achieved something. For example, like maybe Jordan Peterson. And then second, they actually understand what they're talking about. So we could issue a governmental test, and people who would pass the test would be able to vote. At the same time, I don't want them to vote on everything. I want them to vote on particular issues in which they are specialized, right? Like, I wouldn't prefer housewives voting, in how how university system ought to operate. So that's that. And I mean, ideally, how many people would be able to vote? I mean, I actually have no idea. Maybe 30%, maybe 70%. It would depend on the people themselves. They would have to take direct action and get a voter ID license, just like their driver ID license. I think voting is something that you should strive for. And then once you have acquired it, you're basically are welcome into this. Hello?
I'm going to go with no more than 35%. I think that's very... Hello?
Yes, yeah. I mean, look, the thing about...
No more than 35%. And but it has to be like competitive. You have to like earn your spot.
That's right.
There's some sort of like arrangement.
Yes.
Where it's not just like, anybody who can pass this bar. No, it's only 30%.
Yeah.
So not only you have to pass the bar, but that bar is shifting.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that.
And like people, I don't know, but I would say like Tyson Fury, right? If you win you're the fucking heavyweight, then you should have 100,000 votes, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe not 100,000, but you should have, a little bit. But you should have 100 votes if you're a world champion at something. If you're really an outstanding individual at that moment, then yeah, I think your vote should be worth more.
Yeah, like the problem with it is that it would essentially lead to an unchanging corrupt elites. So it would lead to oligarchy. What I am proposing is that there's an actual social mobility. It's not the always unchanging elites who are ruling the show. So the way I said 70% is because...
No, I mean...
What?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I was going to say
would say,
that...
like, you wouldn't be able to vote your whole life, right? Like, if it was, like, there's only a certain period of your life where you're fit and competent enough to people, and obviously,
yes,
like,
they
could, a different measurement.
They could renew their voting license.
But,
so
I think they should definitely, that notion of not having to renew voter rolls is insane. Absolutely insane. But continue, please.
Yeah, so I was going to say the reason why I suspected there will be like 70%, maybe even more voters is because each voter would probably specialize in a couple of things. Somebody would specialize in like in governmental organizing, somebody would probably specialize in executive functioning, somebody would specialize in police stuff, somebody would and a couple of people, like one person maybe specialized like in seven things, so they might be they could vote like in seven things, in seven spheres. And that's why I said that, because it's likely that at least somebody would be able to vote on at least one thing that they know a lot about. But if we're talking about like more than five spheres, more than five specialities, maybe like only 10% of the people would be able to vote in more than five on more than five respects, let's say. So that's why I said it could be as high as maybe even 80%.
Okay. What do you think about the notion that sometimes, or often experts, even experts in their fields, are terrible at predicting
Yes.
the future?
Yes, it's something that I need to reconcile, this vision. It's probably the strongest critique. What's funny enough is that the people who tend to predict the most, like three times better than like hedgehogs, like that are specializing in only one stuff, like Richard Wolff, for example, who knows nothing outside of like Marxism, right? And of course he makes bad predictions. The people who are making better, way better, like three times better predictions are the people who are specializing in a couple of things, and they're able to synthesize their knowledge of the world accordingly from several fields, and then actually give a more accurate answer. So I mean, it is a strong critique, and it has to be accounted for. And I mean, I feel like it's better not to have like a hedgehog, but to have somebody who is more knowledgeable, who is like knows a lot and is able to synthesize knowledge from various fields.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, I've definitely had a period of my life where I was very myopic in reading, and in the last let's say 8 years, 9 years, I've been a little bit more eclectic, drawing from ancient
Yes.
philosophy and novels and things like that, even like business books and self development and psychology, all of these things. So it's definitely broadened my view of the world, and I do find it interesting that when you do meet those people who are hedgehogs, like the people who are really really good at, just maybe a few things, they tend to be NPCs, if
They
that
do.
makes sense. Like the
Yeah.
ultimate NPCs. Like they're really good at what they do. Like maybe they work out 4 days a week, and they're also like day trading cryptocurrency, and they're learning to code iPhone apps. But you ask them about anything relating to like social issues or politics, and their only frame of reference is maybe the New York Times,
Yeah.
and they have, it's like the most kind of like, well, trust the experts sort of
Yeah.
mindset.
Trust the experts
So
who
I do
happen to
find
be
that,
hedgehogs themselves, which is funny.
yes, yeah. Well, and the other, I mean, I'm not sure if I would wager to bet, maybe you have read a little bit of Nassim Talib.
I have read some of his anti-fragility. The rest, I believe, well, of course, and I have read his terrible critique of IQ, but I don't really remember what else I have read.
Yeah, well, I mean, he kind of brings up some interesting points about kind of operating based on probability. I kind of forget where I was going with that, but he definitely has interesting things to say about having a kind of diverse capabilities in order to shield yourself from potential shocks and
Yeah,
things you might otherwise be aware of.
yeah. I mean, it sort of also reminds me of like the G factor of intelligence in a way where your general intelligence can be deducted and is better explained from your ability to specialize and understand multiple things, I guess multiple fields at the same time, like mathematical ability, literary ability, spatial, and etc. So it does also seem to be confirmed in this way, and people who are only good, I mean, for example, I'm not very good, like my mathematical ability is not particularly well. It's actually, well, I've not been a good math student. My grandfather was a math teacher before becoming a principal, but I've always been a math student. One time I've even almost failed the math class. That's the only thing that I've ever failed in my entire life. And I'm not very good at it. I also checked like for my genetic predispositions. Turns out I'm like in the bottom like 25% of those people with the mathematical ability. However, other stuff like,
Interesting.
yeah, special ability, literary ability, vocabulary, what it actually means. I'm very much genetically predisposed. There's actual sites you can test it, by the way, and, educational attainment. So it's kind of weird. At the same
See,
time, that I'm good.
you and I
Mhm.
disagree. You and I disagree about the need to get genetic testing. I will not willingly give up my genetic material as some unknown, probably Israeli Mossad linked, whatever company, 23. Okay, good. Well, we've been going for a while, but that actually brings me to the next topic that I wanted to bring up. And you've mentioned this a couple times. You've talked about genetic inequality, and that's a very controversial topic.
It is.
So let's get into it. What do you mean by genetic inequality or the lack of genetic equality, and why do you think it's important?
Well, basically, all humans have inherited a certain amount of genes from their parents. Usually, there are good genes, there are bad genes. For example, I'm genetically predisposed to very bad vision, ADHD, like a couple of cancers. I guess bad mathematical ability, maybe something else that is bad. But that's what I found so far. And there's also good things that I'm genetically predisposed. I'm sure you wouldn't have to wonder what these good things are, unless I'm doing a very bad job at illustrating them. And I think most people are like that. However, sometimes you find people who are very genetically unlucky. You'd also find people who are very lucky genetically, right? And there is, I guess, a degree of not even a bell curve, no, not a bell curve at all, a distribution, I guess an unfair distribution that we simply cannot change. Now, I think people accept it when it comes to individual genetic differences. The problem is when you say that there are group differences. Now, increasingly, it's even harder to talk about sexual group differences. I mean, I guess that's their leftist new thing. And it's important to understand that, because when you understand that, you can actually, any group inequalities are not automatically attributed to mistreatment or like a systemic racism. They're actually recognized and like, oh, so you're this way. Oh, well, okay, whatever. So that would be the first thing why I think it's important. The second thing why I think it's important is because there are people who are talented, and I think the people who are talented, they should be recognized as such, and they should be helped with. And the people who are not talented, who are predisposed to, for example, criminality, they should be looked for. And some people should be cared, but some people are clearly a danger to society, and they should be viewed under suspicion. So, for example, I guess a high genetic correlates towards criminality, anger management issues, and this stuff. I think people who have this, they should be under suspicion. And I think the best moral, equitable society, let's say, is when a person's genetic outcomes are best expressed. Now, we could also modify people's genetics. You don't necessarily have to, even if if you got a very bad handout, it doesn't mean that you should stay this way necessarily. You can try to improve it somehow. There are, of course, environmental effects on genetics. You can, I guess, not just how to say, repress certain feelings, but you can even get rid of them. And there's also there are CRISP technologies. Soon there will be more widespread. And of course, there's always eugenics, usually practiced in the form of abortions. However, they soon could be embryo GWAS selection. So I guess you could also use that. But at the end of the day, I think we should build societies in which a person's individual, genetic potential is expressed without any sort of interferences. So a policy that would privilege a person with a high educational attainment, a person who does well on scores, even if they come from a poor background, I think it should absolutely be encouraged by society. And unfortunately, we are, instead of actually doing that, we're pursuing diversity, we're pursuing group equality instead of pursuing individual genetic, like expression of individual genetic traits, let's say, the best expression of it. So yeah.
Very interesting. So would it be fair to say that you support something like a eugenicist mixed economy?
That's right. But I mean, look, yes, and but I'll just want to clear out misconception. Unfortunately, eugenics has been lied about so much. It doesn't mean like, I presume it does. It would be negative eugenics if you're just walking around and killing people with very bad genetic handouts, as in Nazi Germany. They euthanized about 200,000 people who were disabled. I'm obviously not advocating for it. Absolutely. Yeah. And, and by the way, those people who are disabled, right? I mean, it's a bad genetic handout, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't do other things. Obviously, they would have genetic predispositions towards doing something, towards contributing to society in a different way. So, for example, I have ADHD. I have, a lot of problems. You could say, and there's actually, if you have ADHD, you're 7 times more likely to end up in jail. Not many people know that. You're also you're also 3 times more likely to start a business, right? So even at a certain, like, if we're talking about a mental illness and like a mental disorder, even there are positives, right? So there are,
obviously something like psychopathic behavior wouldn't exist in the human potentiality of genomes if it didn't have at least some adaptive feature with evolution.
Yes, and similar to homosexuality, homosexuality, it actually extends you. It's a form of extending your genes. There are positives to homosexuality as well. Not many people on the traditional.
If everyone is that way, then obviously it's gonna kind of fuck up society.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
very
interesting.
And
that's why homosexuality is only like very few % of people are homosexual. The evolution, we wouldn't evolve if 30% of our population was like that. No. It was specifically designed in the best optimal way.
Well, people tend to have a very difficult time wrapping their head around the potentiality that there's both some genetic influence and there's environmental influence
That's right.
in something like homosexuality.
Yes.
But you just mentioned that, the notion of like treating each people, kind of utilizing their genetic potential to the fullest, and even if they are something like disabled, that it doesn't necessarily discount their ability to contribute in other ways. And I
That's
think
right.
that's actually a really important point. And I don't know, have you ever seen the movie 300?
300?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So you remember how the Spartans lost, right?
They were
What was the
betrayed
one thing?
by a very ugly midget with genetic disorders.
And yes, but why did he betray the Spartans?
Because they didn't accept him for his genetic disorders.
Exactly. So I always thought that was an interesting parable or
Yes,
allegory. This
it
notion
is.
that you should be very careful how you treat the lesser among you, and how to make sure you don't alienate people within your own kind of tribe. Make sure that you do utilize even people who are a little bit different, so
That's
that they
right.
don't turn turncoats and betray
Yeah,
you to your enemies.
I mean, I actually agree with the message. However, there are certain people who are just really bad.
Oh
I'm
yeah, of course.
talking
Yeah.
about genetic psychopaths. I'm talking about those with a genetic
Yeah.
predisposition to violence, to criminality. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we
Well,
should really
we also
minimize these people in our society. Like, we should
yeah
get
we
real
also talked
with it.
about tolerance, the difference between tolerance and promotion, right? Like, just because you have certain qualities, certain people have certain qualities, you might be able to tolerate it and utilize it, but you wouldn't necessarily promote its widespread proliferation amongst more people in your society.
Yes, I mean, probably the best example to this would be the toleration of people who may be sexual minorities, or who may be, uh, I mean, I guess predisposed to certain things that are not common amongst the right. So I think uh, your statement, it could be used to counter some of the right's, I guess, inability to accept certain people with the pathologies that they have. Uh, so, I mean, obviously, we cannot have a lot of, let's say, sexual minorities voting for parties that oppose us, right? So, there has to be some common sense solutions which will, of course, not compromise on right wing values, but not significantly alienate the population, you know, that may be like a sexual minority.
Most definitely agree. Most definitely agree. And I think wrap up about there. Is there anything you want to mention, talk about, anything you want to plug or shill or anything like that?
Um, for now, no, I guess. I would probably have to plug my website in like in 1 or 2 months from so, but I don't have a website yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to, what about your Telegram or anything like that?
Yes.
Any kind of video coming up that you want to give us a preview about?
Yeah. So basically, I'm on Telegram. It's Ubersoy. I'm also on Twitter. It's Ubersoy. You can find the links for it in like every single uh, one of my videos. I list these links there, and if you want to talk with me, I always answer DMs. I mean, unless they're unless they're threats, or unless they're like, I mean, very low IQ. I mean, sometimes I get these too. Sometimes,
What did we see?
yeah.
Satanic Hitlerite, something like
Oh
that. Somebody was
no, I
spamming Hitler.
mean, I actually don't get much hate from leftists. A lot of hate that I receive, it's from like from those who are far, far, far to the right. It's basically, oh, you're a Jew or whatever. It's what else? apparently I'm a nutsball, so there's been like people threatening me for like quote unquote being a nutsball. I mean, that's uh I had no idea I was a nutsball. I had to clarify that I wasn't in my debate, but there are certain rumors about me. I mean, I don't know where these people get this information from, but I mean, it's always funny, and they say that that this old stuff as a form to like, I guess, put me down or like expose me or whatever. Like I get shit from being in a certain Telegram chat with a person who is like pro mixed marriage. So I even get shit for it. I mean, I don't really know how to comment that. But yeah, sometimes I get hate from leftists. I haven't got any hate from leftists in the past 6 months, like direct DMs full of hate. Never got anything in the past half a year. Yeah.
They usually stick in their echo boxes. They're not,
Yeah.
well, to some degree,
Yeah.
but that's another conversation.
That's right.
Well, in any case, man, this was a really cool conversation, and I enjoyed chatting with you. It's neat to learn about some of your perspectives and a little bit more about your background. Is there anything else you want to tell the Will to Power audience before we end the podcast?
Yeah, so in the next year, I will be expanding more on the right wing ideology. Like I would be laying out the fundamentals for it, and in the early next year, maybe even by February, I'll make these videos. So I think you better stay tuned for it, and hopefully you'll be able to contribute to it in a way that. That will be to the best of your abilities and in a way that would be very useful to the right-wing movement as a whole.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just recorded a podcast called I think Right Wing Revolt or Right Wing Revolution, something like that. And obviously, I think that's one of the reasons I had you as a first interview is because you also kind of have that kind of perspective towards redefining the right a little bit, and kind of repositioning the right as an oppositional movement that's kind of grounded in a little bit more of a materialist framework and not just necessarily religious identity or tradconism, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably like there are four right wing I guess branches that I very much disagree with. First is the fascists, for obvious reasons, then libertarians. I think we both understand why. For now, it's mostly because they essentially work to justify censorship against us. So they're not on our side when it comes to action. Third is the mainstream conservatives. I guess I don't have to explain my position there either. And of course, the fourth one is, the kind of like a very traditionalist, like a theologians. The problems with them is that they reject very basic things. They're essentially like leftists. They in a way they are high into the abstract reasoning in the metaphysics. They're not living in the ground up reality. Plus a lot of for example the gender roles, they want to force it. They want to force they want to take away some civil rights, and I mean there's a lot of things you can criticize even their positions, but probably one of the biggest things is that it's the defenders of these traditions, they are not particularly skilled, unfortunately. Like the person who I've spoken with, Applied Virtue, he was actually, if to compare it to people who shared his beliefs, he was very intelligent, in the way that he complied himself. But of course, there were a lot of logical traps in in his reasoning. And similarly is the distributist, and he had to drop a lot of the traditionalist language just to be able to be listened to and just to have a debate, because he understands that there's a lot of things he just simply cannot defend. So, like, for example, I could probably defend anything, my set of beliefs. It's very easy. Like, I find it to be very easy to defend practically everything I believed. Like half a year ago, I found it hard to defend my opposition towards veganism, but not any longer. And I mean, I could easily defend anything, but these people, they're struggling, and I think partially is because they're just they're not grounded up in reality and their demands. They're just the current state of affairs. There's just no way it's even practical, or a lot of people would want it. So that would be that.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah, like I'm not against I guess moderate trad people. The problem is people who probably espouse the views of maybe Nick Fuentes. I mean, I think that's too much trad cornery for me.
Yeah, I confess I've never listened to Nick Fuentes. I just, maybe for like 20 seconds, and then it annoyed me. And it never caught my attention. But
well,
in any case, man, I'm gonna actually wrap this up because I gotta get stuff done. But this is an amazing interview, and we should definitely continue this conversation. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show.